Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll find my commentary upon the changing nature of work will complement much of the narrative that you've heard from Mark, in part because we've used as our source materials a very excellent report that was launched last week on the future of work by CEDA. And if you haven't had a look at that report yet, you should have a look at it. It's really good work. What I'm going to do is give you a sense of the history of technological change on work and the workforce. Perhaps remind you from a more technical point of view of some of the very important technology interventions of the last 1 or 2 generations, so 40 years, give you a sense of what I think are the forces of change today, and then hesitantly look into the future and suggest what we might expect. So pretty much since the 18th century and the start of the Industrial Revolution, and in the generations since, technology has been a driver of dramatic changes in how work is done and the shape of the workforce. It began with mechanisation of the textile industries in the 1760s, then electrification of factories around about 1900, continued through to automation, probably timed around 1940s, then computerisation in the 1960s, and now the age of the internet and the rise of the individual as both worker and customer since probably the mid-90s. And along the way, workers have been displaced, industries have been disrupted, and companies have been destroyed. This is Schumpeter's creative destruction, a commentary dating back to 1942, which described how economic growth was sustained by the breaking down of institutional frameworks and the destruction of firms through innovation, and by entrepreneurs creating new products and new services. This is, after all, the capitalist process and sometimes messy and painful formula for national economic success. As Mark has emphasised, the CEDA report has warned about the potential to lose 5 million jobs, or substantially to redesign 5 million jobs over the next 10 to 15 years. So yes, the pace of threatening technological change is breathtaking. Consider the recent past. The beginning, in my view, the beginning of the personal computer era began with the introduction and the launch of the IBM PC in 1981. The internet and the World Wide Web became conveniently accessible, certainly in Australia, around about 1995, with email as the first popular application. That's 20 years ago. Then, in quick succession, firms like Amazon.com, eBay, Yahoo, Google appeared. They all kind of listed in the US as public companies towards the end of the 1990s. 1997 was a busy year for these organisations. Some of you will remember the dot-com boom, and it peaked in the year 2000. And shortly thereafter, affordable and convenient broadband access became available in Australia in 2004, when the first 256 kilobit per second service was available from Telstra. That's approximately 100 times slower than today's average experience. Just by the by, in the 10 years since the launch, bandwidth has increased by a factor of 100, and that follows a law that is expected to prevail for another 10 years, so you can plan on having blisteringly fast, high-speed connectivity to the internet in the 2020s. During the last decade or so, futurists began to talk about a fully interconnected world where bandwidth was free, processing speeds near infinite, and data storage costs near zero, a direction that describes a path that we are currently on. So the last 30 or so years have seen an unprecedented level of development and intrusion of new systems, new services and appliances into our personal and professional lives. There are now, as you know, more wireless devices than people on the planet, and the notion of 24/7 access and availability is novel no longer. But as Marcus says, remarkably, work practices have adapted, sometimes extensively. And following the substantive microeconomic reforms of the 1980s and 90s, and yes, helped mightily by the growth of Asian demand, especially from China, as customers for our natural resources, today more Australians are employed in better jobs and at higher pay than ever before. Yes, jobs have certainly disappeared. In the report that Mark and I have referenced, Professor Hugh Durant-White emphasises that jobs that can be automated, disintermediated or outsourced to lower cost and more efficient countries are most at risk. In contrast, those roles with a high content of social intelligence and interactivity will increase. These include carers, teachers, yes, managers, and so on. And also with changes in the national economy and the population concentrating in our capital cities, jobs in regional Australia are proving to be especially vulnerable. Any description of growth industries of the future must include reference to terms like software, programming, nanotechnology, 3D printing, advanced engineering, robotics, biotechnology, drones, artificial intelligence. These are technologies where skills in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, so-called STEM subjects, will be important. But it is in this area of education and training that Australia may be falling behind. But yes, we are an adaptable lot. Our people are more highly educated and our economy more productive than ever before. Superficially, it seems the furious pace of technological change since 1980, and it has been furious, has been positive for us. So the future might be one of further opportunity rather than fear. Here, Mark and I think, are speaking from the same hymn book. But as the contributors to the CEDA report on the future of work have noted, there are currents of which we should be aware and we should be mindful. 30% of the workforce at the moment is now casual or part-time and incidentally broadly satisfied with that particular role. If you extrapolate it linearly to 2050, which is a hazardous thing to do and probably arithmetically not exactly right, about half of all Australian jobs could be casual, part-time or self-employed by the middle of the century. And again, reflecting in the main the preference of workers and the needs of the particular industry structure than as a diminished form of employment, which is sometimes the way we think about it. I remind you that like the now dated concepts of the nuclear family or a white Anglo-Saxon population, the traditional model of stable full-time work will transmute. It will transmute, and the workforce composition will diversify, and the nature of work will diversify. 30 years ago, period where some of you may have been at school, a typical career involved a period of study as a young person, followed by a full-time job, employment at perhaps 2 or 3 organisations over a working life of about 40 years, ending with retirement during one's 50s or 60s. Today, most students work part-time while studying, and many will continue working part-time after graduation until they find their desired job. During their working years, they will have 15 or more assignments in different institutions, sometimes full-time and at other times casual work as they adjust to market and personal circumstances. You know that few young people today expect to work in one organisation for decades. That is so yesterday. People will live longer and therefore must expect to work longer. Work will be approached as a marathon with many stages, not a race. Lifetime learning will be the norm, and educational institutions will evolve to make this easy, affordable and satisfying. Retirement will not be a threshold event. Phil Ruthven, again in a contribution to this report, reminds us that 3/4 of all jobs are in the service economy, and this proportion will increase with the growth in the number of healthcare professionals, teachers, managers and people employed in the tourism and hospitality sectors. Work as a consequence should be less physically demanding. And so the population of mainly male workers, exhausted by a lifetime of manual work in manufacturing, mining, construction, will give way to service providers, increasingly female, physically capable of working for longer, and in many cases required to by financial circumstances associated with life expectancies into the 90s. So as we get into the final straight and talk about the way ahead, in 2005, that's 10 years ago, few of us predicted the direction and pace of technological change a decade ahead. Believe me, few of us got it right, got even close to understanding the breathtaking changes that have occurred technically in the last 10 years, and therefore to try to forecast the next 10 years is really quite pointless from a technology point of view. Minister Malcolm Turnbull last week emphasised in his address at the CEDA report launch that it is unhelpful to attempt to future-proof your strategies or maybe even your investments. Trying to insure against the future does not work. It reflects a conservative, if not defensive, mindset and is naive in the face of the technology tsunami. Uncertainty, volatility and risk do lie ahead, and we have to learn to leverage the situation. Not just being resilient as circumstances change, but anti-fragile as defined by the author of Black Swans, Nassim Taleb, where you benefit from the shocks, from the randomness, from the uncertainty and disorder. As the minister said, make volatility your friend. It's a terrific headline. The challenge is how. So what are the implications for public policy? Given the unpredictable changes ahead, and there will be changes of that, you can be certain, we must remain flexible and adaptable, especially in our work processes, in our labour markets and in industrial relations. 16% of our graduates emerge with STEM-related qualifications, 1 in 6. Compare this to 30% in China and 50% in Singapore. The engine room for economic growth and job creation is our industrial base of small to medium enterprises. Government policy must be directed to supporting SMEs and fostering collaboration and cooperation between SMEs, universities, CSIRO and government. Of course, government should walk the talk through their procurement processes and policies and the delivery of services digitally. They must aim for best-in-class experiences. Finally, the National Broadband Network, we finally got to that, is critical infrastructure, especially for regional and rural Australia and many other areas which are currently underserved. The faster this project can be built and completed, the better. We are, of course, not the only nation grappling with this issue of the future of work, but this CEDA forum should help illuminate the way ahead. Thank you.